Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to my next Deep Purple video where today we're talking about the first Mark II reunion in the 1980s. So this album, or this video will probably be a little bit longer again. We've got two albums to tackle. And they are, of course, Perfect Strangers, the album that kicks the reunion off, and The House of Blue Lights, a very interesting album, which I've got some interesting takes on. Hopefully you'll find them interesting anyway. And yeah, so Deep Purple Mark II is back. It goes without saying who the lineup is, but I'll say it anyway. We've got Ian Gillan on lead vocals, Richie Blackmore on guitar, John Lord on keyboards, Roger Glover on bass, and Ian Pace on drums. And the members, they all kept busy in the intervening years. Obviously, Richie Blackmore had a lot of success with his own band Rainbow, where he was the band leader and he ran the band like a dictator. I'm a huge fan of Rainbow, by the way. I'll probably do videos talking about their albums because it's a very storied little run that they have. Obviously, they're famous for having many lineup changes. Every single album would have a lineup change because that was just how Blackmore rolled. One member of Rainbow that never got fired, though, was Roger Glover, actually. One of the few Rainbow members that kind of left by default because the band disappeared. So that's what Glover was doing. Before he joined Rainbow, he was doing some production work. He did the Butterfly Ball concert, which was really cool. Ian Gillan, he kept busy as well. After Gillan leaves the 70s Mark II, he takes some time out of the industry, runs a couple of businesses, and eventually winds his way back in the music industry, where he puts together his first solo band, known as the Ian Gillan Band. And they did some really, really cool kind of fusion influence stuff, kind of proggy, very much, rooted in that kind of mid-late 70s vibe. He eventually gets another band that was just known simply as Gillan, and they're really cool as well. That shows him kind of returning to the more traditional rock roots. He gets, yeah, he experiences some pretty decent success with Gillan, not so much in North America, but very much in Europe and in Japan. At the end of the Gillan band's run, he actually has to get vocal surgery to remove nodes from his vocal cords, and when the doctor recommended that he took some time off singing, he decided to join Black Sabbath. which that's what you do, of course, right? If you're Ian Gillan, and the album he does with Sabbath is fantastic. That's probably a controversial take, but I think Born Again is really, really good. I think Born Again is, truth be told, is the last album where we really get Gillan. It is height of his powers vocally. Gillan sounds great on that album in spite of having the surgery and all that. But yeah, maybe I'll talk about Born Again in a video one of these days because, like I said, I'm a big fan of it. And then that leaves John Lord and Ian Pace. And in the 70s, they do an album with Tony Ashton, which I'm admittedly not too familiar with. Shortly after that, they end up joining David Coverdale in Whitesnake, so that's kind of cool. But by the time we get to 1984, I think there's a number of reasons for the reunion. Career revitalization is certainly an element of it. Gillan was fresh out of Sabbath. He needed something new. I think Rainbow was kind of in their commercial period in the early '80s, but I think they I'm not sure how much farther they could have gone with that, and Richie probably saw that as well. And I'm sure Pacey and Lord just would have been happy to have their old band back. So career revitalization is certainly an element of it, but I think the bigger element that kind of spurred the reunion, and I hate to sound cynical, but it's money. They were all offered a large sum of money to do the reunion. They knew that there was lots of money to be made. There was going to be lots of promotion, and for the Perfect Strangers era, that could be the band's commercial peak. Like, the tour was absolutely massive. It was the second largest tour of the year, second only to Bruce Springsteen, but. Some sources say that it was they actually sold more ticket sales, but the official record states that they were number two after Springsteen. But in any case, cynical or not, even if it was largely motivated by money, we should all be really glad that the reunion happened because since 1984, Deep Purple has been on pretty much consistently active duty. So ultimately, it is a good thing that the band gets back together. Now, I should say that this is probably controversial as well. Of all the three periods of Mark II, The 80s version is probably my least favorite, and there's a couple of reasons for that. There's still, good stuff here, but um, I don't I feel the band is, the least on fire. I mean, they're older now, at least in a live context. They were never going to reach the heights of insanity that the original Mark II left. I mean, the original 70s Mark II would push their improvisations to the absolute limit. And this version of Mark II improvised as well, but it doesn't seem to have the same intensity or edge that the original 70s version did. And like I said, I do prefer the early 90s version of Mark II with the whole Battle Rages On era. And I think they're playing with a little bit more fire in that period. And there's reasons for why the band was playing so aggressively, which we'll talk about in the Battle Rages On video, of course. But yeah, the way that I sum up, Perfect Strangers and the House of Blue Light and the touring that's associated with that is, it's good. It makes the grade, it passes, but it's not quite great. One thing that is always said, when particularly when Perfect Strangers comes out, everyone always talks about how, yeah, like the band has proven that the sound is still intact and they're all good to go. But I kind of disagree, and the main reason for that is it's not the absence of John Lord, but the balance between the guitar and the organ is very off during the 80s period. In the classic 70s period of Mark II, like one of the hallmarks of that band was, the dueling solos of John Lord and Ritchie Blackmore. They're both phenomenal soloists, and they had, there was a good balance. Just about every song would have, an organ solo and a guitar solo. By the time you get to the 80s version of Mark II, it's much more guitar oriented, and John Lord is, for the most part, playing a rhythmic role. He does have moments, don't get me wrong. There's a few, good John Lord solos in this era. He does a few cool intros to some of the songs, but for the most part, John Lord is taking a backseat to Blackmore, and Blackmore is very much, the star of the show as far as the soloing and the instrumental side of things go. The other issue that I have with this era, and honestly, like both, the John Lord thing, it goes for that as well. But Ian Paice does not seem to be at his best, and maybe there's a couple of reasons for that. I feel Pacey's drumming on these '80s albums is much more stiff. That really great swingy vibe that he had in the '70s. I mean, you can still tell it's Ian Paice. It has that feel, but it's much more metronomic and on the beat. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Maybe it was like commercial considerations because, tastes had changed at that point. There was a new philosophy for drummers now that drum machines were around at this point where, I think drummers were encouraged to be less flashy and just, give the songs those bare bones. So that could be an element. The other element is it might just be Ritchie Blackmore, because both John Lord and Ian Paice, they seem to take that back seat right the way up until Perpendicular. It's not until Blackmore is out of the band that suddenly, John's organ solos start to flourish again, and he's on equal standing with the guitar. And suddenly, right at the first track of Perpendicular, you can really tell that, Paice is really loosened up, and he's kind of back to that classic, swing and style that he had. So, I think there's probably an element of both, commercial considerations, obviously guitars were cooler than, organ solos in the 80s and whatnot. And like I said, drummers were kind of in this phase where they were more encouraged to play the role of a metronome rather than, put any flash or style into the playing. So, who knows, a lot of that comes down to speculation, but I think I can say fairly objectively that both Lord and Paice really open up after Blackmore leaves the band in the '90s. But yeah, and the other thing, and this is kind of relating to Blackmore's role in the band. When he was with Rainbow, he really got the taste of being, the head honcho. He was the leader. He could, hire and fire members at will. He had final say. And when he comes back into a Deep Purple context, Deep Purple is a band without a leader, or so it's said. And I think that's kind of true in the '84, but I think there's also a certain degree of compromise on behalf of the other band members. So it's not that Ritchie in this era is like running the band or leading the band, but the other members, save for one, Um, I think their attitude is basically, well, just keep Richie happy. If Richie's happy, then we're all happy, and we can all, carry on and do this fun reunion thing. So, yeah, Blackmore isn't necessarily dictating, but I think the other members, in the interest of keeping conflicts to a minimum, just kind of go along with Blackmore, and they want to keep Blackmore happy. Everyone except, of course, Ian Gillan, who has never been shy to stand up to Blackmore or call him out, I think. And of course, this leads to the second major deterioration in Blackmore and Gillan's relationship. Although I think it's a little bit different in the 80's. In the 70's, when Blackmore and Gillan realized they couldn't get along, as John Lord says, they agreed to disagree, and they just didn't talk to each other. They kept their distance. They wanted to keep the band going, I would assume, and they figured that the easiest way to do that is to make the minimal amount of contact as possible. In the 80's, particularly around the House of Blue Light time, they seem to be pretty much openly antagonistic towards each other at this point. They're both kind of throwing shots back and forth, and I think things get a little bit more ugly in the 80's. There's a real famous incident that we'll talk about when I get to the House of Blue Light period, but. Yeah, those are just some random thoughts on the reunion and this particular period in the band's history. And we'll get into the actual songs themselves, but I need a sip from my beer because my mouth is dry. And that will help. It's always good to have a beer when you're talking about Deep Purple. They were notably big fans of beer. They were drinkers. They were a drinking band, right? So yeah, Perfect Strangers. Let's talk about it. The first reunion album. So the decision to reform starts in April of 1984, and then from July and August, the summer of '84, this album is recorded in. It's a fancy sort of estate, I guess, up in Vermont, recorded in New York with a mobile studio. And yeah, one thing about this album, and again, I think this is a good but not a great album. It passes the bar. It does demonstrate that yes, Deep Purple is still a viable act. They're certainly not cutting edge anymore. They're not like on the cutting edge of innovation like they were in the 1970's. But this album is an album of good songs. It's pretty steady. It's pretty consistent all the way through. There's a couple of classics on here. At least one really decent standout track. But on the whole, I think it's a good, not great album. I really struggled when I was thinking about this video and what I'd say about it. I don't think this is as good as any of the '70's Mark II albums. Possibly, Who Do We Think We Are, but I mentioned with Who Do We Think We Are, the album starts really, really strong and it kind of dips afterwards. I think the strong stuff on Who Do We Think We Are is better than anything on here, but this album is a little bit more consistent. It doesn't have, a real dramatic shift in terms of peaks and valleys, right? There isn't any real, like, really, really high highs, and there isn't too many lows either. So, it's a decent album. Um, when this one comes together, the band is very, very happy. Things are good. Gillan and Blackmore are getting along. One of those, probably the last times when they were, not only willing to work with each other, but I think they actually socialized a little bit. They were actually, kind of buddies again. So I think, in the band's memory, this was, obviously a happy time. A hugely happy time for the fans as well. I mean, obviously their band is back. It's kind of funny, really, compared to their immediate contemporaries. Deep Purple is way ahead of Black Sabbath at this point. Sabbath, they do Born Again, and then they kind of go off a cliff, and they come out with some really interesting material. Famously after Gillan leaves the band, Iammi's like, well, let's get another Deep Purple singer in here, and then Glenn Hughes ends up in Sabbath, kind of by accident, but that's another story for another video. But yeah, they're kind of like the only '70's giant that's still making very notable albums. You're right, Heap was making albums in the '70's as well, but not to the same success that this one had. When this came out, like I said, it was huge. This could be the band's commercial peak, and I think a lot of that just had to do with the hype of the reunion. This band that everyone thought was going to be defunct forever is now on the road again. Anyone that ever got a chance to see them in the '70's, well, now they had their opportunity. So there's a lot of justified hype surrounding the album for sure. And I think people probably they rate this album higher because of happy memories of knowing that the band was back together. You know, for me, I was -6 when this album came out. So my memories of it are just when I happened to stumble upon it and discovered it. And even when I first heard it, I thought it was okay. Um, just not stellar, right? It doesn't I don't think it quite lives up to the peak of the '70s stuff, but that's not saying it's bad. There's some good stuff on here. I do think the album cover is really, really good. The DP logo, that's really cool. I mean, I like how stark the album cover is, and we just get that very iconic image. I like Perfect Strangers in red. I think that's a really good look. And the DP logo it would be on every Deep Purple album up until The Battle Rages On. Actually, it's not until again Richie leaves that they scrap the logo, but it's pretty cool. And we get a cool shot of the band at the back, as you do. And yeah, got a cool there's no gatefold, but the inner sleeve's got some fun band pictures. It kind of reminds me of like the cover of Machine Head, where the gatefold on that one, you see just pictures of recording and rehearsing and all that fun stuff. So yeah, we'll talk about the songs then. So opens up with one of the standout tracks. We get "Knocking at Your Back Door." This kind of reminds me. It's that slow burn intro, kind of like "Woman from Tokyo." They don't blast you in the face like some of the other opening tracks, but it's a good song. John Lord actually gets to open the album. He's got that little orchestral patch that he's playing with. He uses a lot of that in the '80s actually. And then it winds its way into the steady build up. Pace comes in on that weird offbeat, which I've always found very entertaining, and then into the riff. And it's a pretty decent riff. I mean, structurally, I found it kind of similar to Smoke on the Water. I mean, the riff has a very different feel, but I mean, structurally, I think I can see a comparison there. Not as good as Smoke on the Water, obviously, but it is really, really good. I will say the other thing about this album is I don't think Gillan is at his best, and I think that kind of hurts the album as well. I think I mentioned before in this take of the video that with Born Again, which like I said, I'm a huge fan of that album. I think that's Gillan sings phenomenally on that album. His voice that's kind of the last gasp of like classic Gillan singing. And he does sound a little tired on this album. I mean, his voice still sounds good, but it doesn't have that richness and tone that you have like in the early '70s. Especially like if you listen to the Hallelujah single, it doesn't represent Deep Purple really in any way other than like maybe a slight relation to Mark One. But if you listen to the tone of Gillan's voice, it's just so rich and full. And now it sounds a little bit more strained, a little bit more nasally. It would improve actually. I think over the next few albums, his voice does get better and better, and then after that age kind of kicks in. But um, there's no screaming on this album, which I think is a bit of a shame because that's kind of always his trademark, right? But is what it is. The lyrics on "Knocking at Your Back Door," I kind of went on a tangent there. I apologize. The lyrics are quite funny. This is classic Gillan. Lots of innuendo, lots of pretty perverted topic, but done in a really fun, silly way. I think that the music doesn't necessarily fit the lyrics on "Knocking at Your Back Door." I think the lyrics are a lot more humorous than the actual music lays on. Like the riff is very, very serious, and Gillan isn't the most serious person in the world, which that's why we love him, right? But yeah, good guitar solo. Good pair of guitar solos, really. There's the main solo itself, and then there's the kind of outro solo. And this is the first time that I get pissed off that there's no John Lord solo. Aside from the intro, he's just kind of playing the chords in the background, which is, I find that to be quite frustrating because it's a Deep Purple album. We want more John Lord. And I think that's the biggest factor that hurts "Knocking at Your Back Door is there's not enough John Lord craziness. But as we'll see, that's kind of a trend that goes throughout most of this period, right? We'll move on to the second track, "Under the Gun." Um, Pretty decent song, mean riff, pretty simple riff, really. Just down, 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 bum, ba-dum, bow, bow, bow. Lord's kind of putting some little inflections to the rhythm there. I think it's pretty good. I like how it's got that very serious riff, but then when we get to that pre-chorus and the chorus, it kind of gets a little bit more funky, a little more bouncy, a little more major sounding. Um, Another good guitar solo. I really like how at the end of the solo, and I can't think of the where the melody comes from, but that doom 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 doom, but it's done in like a Blackmore style, kind of similar to like Difficult to Cure, which he was doing with Rainbow. So that's kind of cool. But again, Under the Gun, it's an all right song. It's not as strong as anything in the '70s period. I would argue, but it's all right. We move on to track three. We get Nobody's Home. This is the only song on the album where every member gets a writing credit. That's another factor of this period is that Blackmore was quite stingy about the writers getting the credit they deserved, and for whatever reason that meant that John Lord and Ian Pace, for the most part, get kicked out. They don't get any writing credits. Because I think Blackmore is saying, no, I write the music and the riffs, and Glover, kind of does a little bit of both. Ian Gillan writes the lyrics, and that's how it is. But Nobody's Home does get a full band credit, probably because this was just jammed out. And that reflects in the music. This I think Nobody's Home is the closest to that classic '70s sound that you get. And it's a fun track. You get Pacey just kind of laying into that cowbell, but he's just playing straight eights. He's not doing anything fancy like on You Fool No One, for example. But this is not the album for a beat like that, I suppose. But one notable thing about Nobody's Home, we finally get an organ solo. It takes 3 tracks before we get John Lord actually kind of letting loose and playing a little bit. And it's an okay solo. It's not as good as some of the stuff in the '70s. Certainly, it's no Rat Bat Blues solo. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I like Nobody's Home. I think that's a standout track on the album. I think it's really cool. And yeah, like I said, closest to the classic Purple, the '70s Purple that you get on here, and it's good. Side one closes out with Mean Streak. This is a pretty cool song. Sometimes I've almost thought of this as being like the really sleek '80s version of something like Strange Kind of Woman. Strange Kind of Woman's a little bit more bluesy, but this does kind of have that a bit more of a swingy beat to it, a bit more like a kind of a shuffle to it, but. Yeah, it's really cool. There's a lot of cool little riffs in there. I really like the between the vocal bits, we get that which is really neat. Good guitar solo. And even though I don't think Gillan's voice is at its best, like it still sounds good. His voice is still good. We just don't get like those screams. But I think his voice is particularly strong on Mean Streak. I think it sounds really good. Classic bit of Gillan lyrics as well. And just a good little rock number. Like I said, this is kind of what you would expect Deep Purple to sound like in the '80s, actually. And yeah, pretty cool. I really like the chorus as well. The guitar riff is really neat. Great hook too. The vocal melody on that has got a really good hook to it. Black Mamba, don't compete. That's pretty cool. And that rounds out side one. So yeah, again, like I said, it's not that there's anything bad on it. It's just it's just good rather than great. I'll say that a million more times in this video. I keep repeating myself, but I'm laboring the point, as you know. But anyway, we flip the record over and we get side 2, which opens with the title track. I think the title track is far and away the best thing on the album. It's really, really good, very triumphant sounding. It's a great riff, and I think it's very emblematic of just the excitement of the reunion. It was this epic sort of thing. It's very anthemic. It's a very slow tempo. It's not one of those crazy Deep Purple things, but I think it works really, really well. Like I said, the verses have that anthemic feel with that classic riff, which is really cool. The chorus, I think, works really, really well. Live versions of this, Blackmore would do a lot more kind of cool noodling, and the studio version, he just kind of arpeggiates the chords, whereas he puts a little extra flourish on it during the live versions. But I think the real highlight is the riff that comes in after the chorus, and it's in 11, I think, 11/4, I think it is. It's a funny time signature, but it's a really, really cool riff. That Really great live. I think that this song really spoke to me when I saw Deep Purple live. I only saw them live once, and it was technically still the Bananas tour. It was just before Rapture of the Deep came out, and I saw them in London, Ontario. It was pretty cool show. But one of the highlights of that show was actually Perfect Strangers, and like I said, I was never a huge fan of that song of this song prior to, but seeing it live, it really changed my my take on it. That riff is just so good. Um, Interestingly, no solos on this song at all. It's all just riffs and vibe and atmosphere, and the lack of solos doesn't deter from the track at all. Like I said, I think Perfect Strangers is probably the best thing on this album, and yeah, and it became a live classic for many years to come. Like I said, I saw them do it live up in 2005. It would have been. So yeah, we move on. We get A Gypsy's Kiss. This is another song that I really like on the album. This is the more high tempo, classic, high energy, Deep Purple stuff. Although it doesn't really sound 70s to me. I think that there's a bit of a Rainbow influence there. Like songs like maybe like Spotlight Kid, that kind of thing. There's a number of songs that a number of high tempo songs that Purple would do that feel kind of the root song is very much Spotlight Kid, but that's okay. I think they're all good songs. One thing I really like about A Gypsy's Kiss though is that this is another case where we kind of get to see John Lord opening up a little bit, and that he kind of runs the main melody or the main riff, I should say, which is really good. Another great, another good, Gillan vocal performance. Again, in context of the time, I think it sounds really good. It's not quite to the same, extremes that he would do in the '70s, but in the context of the album, I think this is a highlight for Gillan. I love the classic bit of like Gillan laughing. I forget what the actual line is, but ha ha ha, mystery, my son, something like that. I think that's really cool. The middle section in A Gypsy's Kiss is really good. That's kind of some classic Purple where we get that, classically influenced thing, and then we got another John Lord solo, which is really nice. And yeah, just really, I really like the intro to A Gypsy's Kiss as well. I look at it just starts with Roger just picking away at the bass, and the guitar and organ kick in with some noodling, and then boom, off to the races. So yeah, Gypsy's Kiss is another one of my preferred songs on here. We get to the third song on side 2, seventh song overall. We get Wasted Sunsets. This is a song that it took me a little while to warm up to. I think listening to this album in preparation for this little video, I listened a little bit more critically, and I did find more to like about it. I always kind of thought of it as like kind of like the slow, weepy power ballad of the album, but it's not really a ballad. It's just, it's certainly emotive. I think this has got Blackmore's best guitar solo on the album. I will say that. I think his guitar solo on here is absolutely fantastic. I think the song as a whole, like it reminds me a little bit of Our Lady. There's a little bit more riffing going on Wasted Sunsets than Our Lady, but it kind of conjures up that sort of vibe for me. And yeah, it's a good song. Again, it's not not really a top Deep Purple track for me, but for what it is, I think they do a good job. And as I mentioned, I think this is probably the Blackmore solo that I like the most on this album is on Wasted Sunset. So that's obviously quite notable. Then we go on to the 8th song on the album. This is the proper closer of the album as far as I'm concerned. We get Hungry Days. Very strange riff. We got John Lord kind of playing around on that the orchestral patch again, and that very staccato, very kind of a European frantic sort of like a marching thing. And it's very cool. Like most songs on this album, it probably could have done with a nice organ solo in there, but there is a kind of a cool middle section where like the song kind of like falls apart, and they put some sound effects on there, and it winds its way back up. But decent guitar solos on there anyway. It's just so frustrating that there's so much guitar, and the organ is the exception rather than the rule. I miss that balance between the two soloists, but again, gonna labor that point because that's the main problem that I have with this version of the band, or this era of the band. But I really like the lyrics on Hungry Days, and again, I think I consider Hungry Days to be the proper album closer, because these Gillan's very much reminiscing on you know, when the band first started, or at least when Mark II first started in '69. Um, I think those lyrics are a nice touch, and there's an element of nostalgia, but there's also an element of we're back and we're gonna do this, and this is what we're doing. The line that always gets me is, "We all came out to Montreux, but that's another song." I like when they do little references to the old days. Gypsy's Kiss has that as well. He mentions space truckers free and high, but he doesn't overdo it. There's just kind of enough to get that little element of nostalgia, but it's you can tell they're still moving on, and they're excited to be an active band again. And that wraps up the album proper, but there was a couple of bonus tracks associated with these recordings, and they are, of course, Not Responsible, which I'm very familiar with. The first version of this album I had was on CD. I guess the tape version from '84 included this as the final track. I do consider it a bonus track and not the final track on the album. I think Hungry Days wraps up the main event a lot nicer, but Not Responsible is still really cool. One of the few examples where Gillan throws an F-bomb in there. It's funny, it gets more common. There's a couple F-bombs in Infinite, many years down the road, but I always found the line where he does say it very kind of strange. It's so aggressive, and it's like, why so aggressive? I got no reason to be waiting at the station. I got no take, but I'm gonna take a fucking ride. It's bizarre that we get. It's a weird place to put an F-bomb, but. And my YouTube video is now not child friendly, but hopefully they don't take it down. I'm sure it'll be up. It's I don't have enough viewers to get into too much trouble, I think, and I don't think too many kids are going to be watching it, so I shan't stress about that. But yeah, I think I really like the riff on Not Responsible. I look the verses are really cool. I like how it kind of switches between that fast paced frantic tempo, and then the verses are a little bit more laid back. And that song's okay. Not as good as the meat and potatoes of the rest of the album, but it's all right. The other bonus track is a song called "Son of a Lyric," which is Richie's. It's funny because it's credited just to Richie Blackmore, but it's really just a laid back 10-minute jam. There is clearly a chord sequence that has been arranged before the jam kind of starts. Maybe that's why Blackmore gets the sole writing credit there, but it's okay. I mean, I've always found it a little bit of a bizarre track, to be honest. It doesn't represent the crazy chaos of Deep Purple that you come to expect, but for what it is, I mean, it's a very pleasant, instrumental experience. I forgot to say it's an instrumental. I think I forgot to say it anyway. Just like analyzing what I think I've said and what I haven't, but Son of a Lyric is very melancholic, very very laid back, and it's very pleasant, but it's kind of an odd thing. It was released as the B-side to I think it was Knocking at Your Back Door was a single. I'm not really too sure. Maybe it was Perfect Strangers. Should have looked that up. But kind of an oddball track, to be honest. I mean, it's it's cool, and that it's Deep Purple jamming on something, but it's not it's not like the Mandrake Root jams after Space Truckin' in the '70s. But it is what it is. It exists, and that's a good thing. So that's Perfect Strangers. After this album, they go on an enormous tour throughout 1985, very much focused on the U.S. The touring. The whole reunion was kind of spurred on by Polydor Records, which is based in New York City, so there was a little bit more emphasis on the States. They do visit Japan, of course, because they've always had great luck in Japan. There is a decently sized little European tour, and then only one show in the UK where they play Nebworth. They headlined the Nebworth Festival, and there is a CD of that called "In the Absence of Pink," which I do not own. I should get that because other than that, I don't have any live recordings from this particular tour in '85. But so the tour, like I said, was enormously successful. Possibly the biggest grossing tour of the year. They were close to Springsteen, but like I said, probably the band's commercial peak. They were huge when Perfect Strangers came out. And then wraps up in 1985, ended 1985, and then They take some time off. Obviously the management must have learned from the experiences in the 70s that they do in fact need a break. So they take a few months off, and then in the spring of 1986 they begin to record the follow-up, and that is the House of Blue Light. So yeah, this is recorded largely in the spring of '86, like I said, and I find this a very, very interesting album. I've got very positive memories of this. When I first got it, I heard Perfect Strangers. I had a few compilations. I was familiar with the '70s stuff, but this was the first time that I bought an entire album of Deep Purple, and it was all old songs, but they were all songs that I'd never heard before. So this was a early Christmas of my life, so I maybe would have been like 13, 14, somewhere in that area. And listen, this album always takes me back to that time. So that maybe I'm a little bit biased to my opinion, but I think this is a pretty decent album, honestly. Like the general consensus, and I do understand where it's coming from. I mean, Perfect Strangers is the big triumphant return, and then House of Blue Light is kind of where things fall apart again. This is kind of like, some people would call this the Who Do We Think We Are of the 80s. Um, and I think the band is starting to run into a little bit of dysfunction again. Blackmore and Gillan are once again not getting along, although I assume they're still on talking terms at this point. I don't think it was like, Who Do We Think We Are, where they just kept away from each other. Although during the tour of this album, they would really kind of come to blows, and the peak of their antagonism towards one another really happens on the tour for this album, I believe. But yeah, the thing that about House of Blue Light is that the peaks and valleys are much stronger on here. So I think, the good bits of House of Blue Light, I argue, are better than the good bits on Perfect Strangers, but the low bits on House of Blue Light are much lower. So this is an album of, at least to my taste, it's there's more extremes. I think there is a little bit more commercial consideration on this album. I think Perfect Strangers, they do keep it safe to a certain extent. I think that might be why John Lord doesn't get as many, solo showcases, because it's the 80s and Guitar Gods and this, that, and the other thing. So like they do consciously become more of a guitar-oriented band. But there's a few songs on here that are, structurally and like aesthetically, they are designed to be kind of poppier songs, which none of them really caught on. I mean, the Purple shouldn't be doing that, especially at this stage in the game. I mean, they were already a very established band. It seems weird to me that they were, trying to write more commercial songs or doing music videos and stuff like that, which is just kind of bizarre. There's a couple of odd music videos that come from the songs on this album, but they'll never be as bad as the one that comes out with Joe Lynn Turner a few years later, but we'll talk about that in the next video. But yeah, I think, overall, I understand why this album is a little bit maligned, but, due to my personal experience, like when I got the album and the excitement that I felt first time hearing a lot of the songs, I do have a soft spot for the album, and, like I said, it's very difficult to compare to Perfect Strangers, I mean, Perfect Strangers is more consistent, from one end to the other. It's a smoother listen. This is a little bit more all over the place. But like I said, the best bits of this album, I think, I would pick over Perfect Strangers. So difficult albums to compare, but it's an essential part of Deep Purple's history, and it's a shame that virtually none of the songs on here have ever been played live. After this tour was wrapped up, and that could be just negative associations with the songs. I mean, I think the band. Well, they may have been on talking terms, but I don't think it was a very happy time. It was certainly not as blissful as Perfect Strangers, but that's all good because they still made the album, and I still like it. Good cover. I think the cover is all right. The title is obviously taken from a line from Speed King when she was rocking in the House of Blue Light, and we get this kind of creepy door with these symbols that represent each of the band members, and there's kind of cool little odd details. Obviously, the mysterious blue fog coming out of this door, which is cracked open, and there's a mouse there, and looks like a crumpled up newspaper, lots of cobwebs, and of course we get the DP logo once again. The DP logo is also present on the doorknob, so we're in that era, right? It's a four album run where we see that logo. I find the back cover very frustrating because you the song titles are extremely hard to read, and they're not really in the proper order, and we kind of get all this random stuff. I guess this is what's inside the House of Blue Light. I guess that's the concept. And then we get our typical band photos and whatnot, but yeah, not the greatest cover. And then the inner sleeve is kind of boring. We just get extremely tiny print for the lyrics, and then just a more stuff and random objects spinning around in this blue fog thing around what appears to be a moon. It's like some kind of moon type thing that's everything's orbiting around. Very strange, but the front cover is still good. I think the front cover does the job. I think it's nicely balanced and looks all right. So before the songs, I'll need another beer because my voice is sore. I had to do a lot of talking at work today, so forgive my slightly scratchy throat. So, the album opens up with a song called Bad Attitude. Right away, this is a song that I've always really liked. I think this is really, really good. Lyrically, I kind of suspect that this is another, this is almost like a follow-up to Smooth Dancer, and that I kind of get the idea that the lyrics are concerning, the breakdown in Gillan and Blackmore's relationship again. I think there's another story where I think Richie Blackmore said that he and Gillan had a bad attitude, and he hated the phrase bad attitude, something like that. I'm not sure the exact details, but the song itself is cool. I like the big organ intro that we get at the start. I think that's really effective, and then the shots, the bop bop, and then it kicks into the groove. Again, there is a commercial element to it. I mean, it's a very very mid '80s riff. I should say this was released in early '87, by the way. But yeah, very 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 '80s riff. But I think the chorus is really good. There's some cool kind of build-ups, back and forth. Good guitar solo. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is about it. I like it. Maybe this is just that nostalgia factor. When I hear it, I remember how excited I was. Oh, I've never heard this Deep Purple song before. This is so exciting, and it is good. There's nothing wrong with it. I like the little intro that kind of goes into the solo, and the solo itself the guitar solo is really really cool. It's very one of Blackmore's slower solos, kind of meanders a little bit, but it is very lyrical and melodic, and it's really cool. I really like towards the end of the song where again John Lord's playing with that kind of orchestral patch, and he does that. I always found that part quite emotive, actually. Um, there's live versions where the live version on the Nobody's Perfect album, which I'm not going to talk about. Um, I really like how when that synthesizer part doing the orchestral thing, when that comes in, they actually shift the tempo a little bit, and pace goes into a shuffle, and it kind of creates this very interesting kind of polyrhythmic cycle, which isn't on the studio album, but the live versions they do that, and it sounds really really good. Um, and then, of course, at the very end, we get Lord really like slamming down on those supreme 1987 keyboards. It'll be 1986 when it was recorded, but that beep, 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 beep. It's not the kind of sounds that you expect from John Lord, but it's cool. I think it works. It's a good opening track. I think a little more high energy than Knocking at Your Back Door from the last album. But anyway, leads us to the second song on the album. We get The Unwritten Law. This is a song that Ian Paice gets a writing credit for because the drum pattern is very interesting. He lays into a tom groove. I'm not sure if that was a response to obviously this mid '80s. This is the era of Peter Gabriel, and he's really pushing the world music thing, and of course everyone's doing the world music thing. So I'm not sure if doing a sort of tribal influence drum pattern there was a response to that, but I think it sounds really really good. Again, John Lord's on that orchestral thing, that orchestral patch. I had to finish. I had to finish it. I had to finish it. I think that's really really cool. Chorus is pretty good, pretty catchy, pretty hooky. I really love the intro. That's one of those classic Deep Purple things where you get Ian Gillan singing along with Richie's guitar. I think that's really really cool. And yeah, I think it's a decent track. I've always enjoyed it quite a bit. The drums kind of provide the outro, and he kind of goes into his classic classic tom tom bash away for courtesy of Pacey. And yeah, I always thought it was a good song. This was played live a little bit. Again, didn't I don't it wasn't on the entire tour, but there are live versions of it that you can find online, which is cool. And yeah, I like it. I think it's a good song. We move on to track 3. We get Call of the Wild. This is the first song on the album that kind of dips for me. This is very very commercial. They're very clearly in a commercial mindset here. Um, I really like the intro riff, kind of I guess like the central riff of the song, that very much of the time, but it's it's good. I mean that specific part definitely reminds me of like, oh yeah, that's what Deep Purple should sound like in the 80s. It's the chorus that kind of drives me crazy. It seems so contrived to me. They're really, Blackmore's got these, really friendly, bouncy chords, and then the melody is da na 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 na. The lyrics are your classic kind of Gillan kind of thing, but musically it just doesn't do anything for me. And this is like the first song that like I said, it really dips quite a bit for me, and I'm not a fan of Call of the Wild, to be honest. Aside from that main riff, there's kind of a cool little middle section, but again, there isn't really a solo in the song. And again, that might be a commercial thing, like, oh, you're not gonna have guitar solo, or not gonna have an organ solo, just do this little kind of funky middle eight thing and be done with it. But yeah, that's Call of the Wild. Probably my least favorite on the album, to be totally honest, but doesn't last too long, which is good. We would get Mad Dog, the 4th track on the album. This song I really really like. I think Mad Dog is fantastic. I think Mad Dog is better than anything on Perfect Strangers. Controversial. Maybe I'm saying that I'm saying that now, and hearing myself say it out loud, I question if it's as good as the title track of Perfect Strangers. But I've always liked Mad Dog. Again, very up tempo, high energy track. I love the riff. One of those dirty raunchy riffs from Blackmore. Although that's another element of frustration, is that first intro where Richie's Riffy's riching on the guitar, Richie's riffing on the guitar, and he does that slide for that extra effect, and it's like, again, why can't John Lord do something there? Why do you got to overdub all your guitars to create this little? I think that maybe that's a Rainbow thing that he couldn't let go of. He had that idea in his head and really insisted on it, and the rest of the band being in that mindset of, well, just go along with Richie. Don't want to piss Richie off. They kind of go along with it. But I would have been happier hearing John Lord kind of augmenting that opening riff. But minor complaint. Like I said, on the whole, Mad Dog I think is a really good song. John Lord does get a solo on here. He's not playing the organ though. He's kind of playing this very 80s, very much of its time kind of synthesizer. But I think the solo is really good. It's very short. You can tell it's been composed. There's a I really like the way that the solo kind of like ends off, which sounds really cool. Yeah, that's Lord's first solo on the album. Very short and sweet, but still pretty decent. And yeah, like I say, overall, really good track. One of my favorites on the album, and that's Mad Dog. We move on to the final song on the first side. We get Black and White, which is track 5. A fun song. This is kind of talking about journalism. I think specifically with regards to music journalism, and I think Ian Gillan is saying watch what you read. It's not necessarily all true. And in this day and age, you got to be careful with journalists, because what they say isn't always true. We've learned that time and time and time and time again at this point. But I think Gillan's specifically talking about music journalism in this particular song. But it's a decent track. Nice to hear Gillan doing the harmonica. I really like the harmonica intro there. Kind of a cool, kind of like a chugging sort of a rhythm, and I like John Lord's. He's doing that kind of percussive thing on the organ, that which gives it a really cool effect. And yeah, it's a good song. Pretty short, but decent. I call it a decent album track. Kind of middle of the road. Not one of the highlights, but not one of the lowlights either. Um, got a cool. I like the chorus. There's kind of this raising sort of element, this ascending element, and kind of explodes with the "It's in black and white," and then right back into that groove. And yeah, definitely a decent song for sure. And that wraps up the first side. We flip the record over to look at the tacky back cover for 2 seconds or 2 milliseconds. Very specific. And we get Hard Lovin' Woman, which track 6 and opens up the second side of the album. This is another one that I think is very, very deliberately commercial. I mean, it was written in that you can tell it was written for the purposes of radio play. They're very conscious of it, but I really like this one for some reason. I've always found Call of the Wild to be very contrived, but Hard Lovin' Woman, it has a flow to it, and some of the riffs in it are really good. Like particularly the chorus riff. That's almost like a second cousin to the Space Truckin' riff. That's kind of a classic Deep Purple thing. We got Lord, throughout the song is playing those synthesizers again. And the best part of this is Gillan's lyrics. Obviously, "Hard Lovin' Woman" is a callback to "Hard Lovin' Man" from In Rock, obviously. But it's one of those cases where Gillan his lyrics they're so silly and they're so over the top, but it's delivered in such a way where it's very humorous and it's funny and it's lighthearted and it's snarky. Gillan is snarky. That's another good word to describe his singing style, lyrical style, and his attitude. But that's why Gillan is cool. And it's funny. Like when we'll talk about more of this when we get to the next album with Joe Lynn Turner when he does when he tries to do like the kind of overly sexual songs. The humor just doesn't work. I'm not sure if it's because Joe Lynn Turner's American, but like when Gillan does it, it's because he's just doing it because he's a funny guy. He's a funny, goofy guy. When Joe Lynn Turner does it, it's very much like, you know, I am the corporate person, and I'm going to write the prearranged lyrics that suit the date and time and this that and that. But I'm rambling about the wrong album here right now. We'll talk more about Joel and Turner for the next album. But the point is, I think "Hard Lovin' Woman" is a very successful pop song. Well, not successful in terms of what it did in the charts or anything like that. But as a song, I like it quite a bit. I think it's cool. And there's a great live version of that one as well. Then we move on to track 2 of side 2, track 6 overall. We get The Spanish Archer. This is a pretty cool song. I think, again, I consider it kind of middle of the road, but it's still pretty good. I almost get Pictures of Home vibes from The Spanish Archer. It doesn't have the cool stop-start stuff as Pictures of Home. I think Pictures of Home has a more interesting arrangement. But it's the chord changes in The Spanish Archer that I think they feel really good, and very dramatic melody that Gillan delivers very well. Lots of good guitar stuff, although arguably a little bit too much. I don't know why John Lord's not doing too much, not doing that much organ on this track. I mean, he's again just kind of holding down the fort, so to speak. But overall, another good track. Not one of the best on the album, but certainly not one of the worst. And Spanish Archer. There you go. I wish I had more to say about that one, but it's really just it's the chord change is the real notable one, and the chord changes are the notable bit, and the cool melody, and the problem is it doesn't really go too far. You know what I mean? I think that there is a really cool is it The Spanish Archer that I'm thinking of? There's a really cool riff that leads into one of the solos, but I think I might be thinking about Black and White actually. I forgot to mention that when I was talking about that song, but. No worries at all. Spanish Archer, I've talked about that one. We can move on, can't we? We move on to track 7, third track on the second side. We get Strange Ways. Now, I think this is a missed opportunity. I think there's a lot of great elements to Strange Ways, but there's some issues to it as well. And I think if they tighten the arrangement up, maybe shorten the song down a little bit, it would be a lot better. The elements that are good about it are really good. Like I really like the vocal intro, and I like how when the song is in full swing and He double tracks the vocals, and he creates this really strange effect, really, where he does the really long, he sings the, strange ways, and then sings like kind of the main lyric over top of that, which creates a sort of disorienting effect, which I think is really cool. The riff itself is pretty cool, but dun, 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 dun. It's decent, but it never really develops, and it overstays its welcome just a little bit, I think. Um, which is what it is. John Lord does get another synthesizer solo on here, but again, it's a little bit, there's not enough of it. It is really good. Again, it's one of those arranged things. You can tell that he would have written that and planned it out. There's a few little moments in strange ways where Lord kind of showcases the gear that he's using, but he's not playing to his peak. He's not playing to his full capacity, which again is frustrating. And like I said, there's cool bits to the song. It's just a little bit too damn long, and that main riff doesn't really develop the way that you would want it to. But like I said, decent song, bit of a missed opportunity, perhaps a little bit undercooked. And then we wrap the album up with two songs. There's two songs towards the end. I think I said wrap the album up a little bit too quickly there. We get Mitzi Dupree. This is the ninth track on the album, fourth track on side 2. And Mitzi Dupree might be my favorite song on the album. I absolutely love this song. Very much a bluesy number. I really like the riff that, I think it's great. It is one of the bluesier things, and this is so Gillan. It's one of those classic road stories. I love Gillan songs where it's kind of like folk tales of the road, or these crazy things that happen to him, and he turns them into these cool songs. The song is about an entertainer by the name of Mitzi Dupree, and she was a real person. And I believe it's when Gillan's in Black Sabbath. It's an 83 when he I guess he just meets her on this plane, and they have a conversation or whatever. And Mitzi Dupree was famous for an X-rated act that she did involving ping pong balls, and that's all I'll say about that. But leave it to Gillan to write this great song, and it's his lyrics are so good. I mean, he's such a good storyteller, and I mean, I just think it's a great song. The funny thing about this track actually is it's a classic bit of Ritchie Blackmore being difficult, but they recorded like a demo of it, and Blackmore hated it so much that he outright refused to record it again. So they had to use the guitar track that was recorded during this demo, and that's what you get on the final album. I think that's why the intro was so kind of weird. We kind of get those like little scratchy, he's just kind of scratching along before the song actually kind of goes into itself. Great piano work by John Lord. I love how Lord's playing the piano on this one, which is really cool. And yeah, it's a great song, and even the guitar solo, which I think was recorded during the demo, so I think it's arguably my favorite guitar solo on the album. He does a really really good job of it, and he just I don't know if that Ritchie just wasn't feeling a bluesy song like that, or if he just hated Gillan, and Mitzi Dupree is like I said, it's very much a Gillan thing. This is his kind of baby. But yeah, for whatever reason, Blackmore hated it, refused to record it again, so they just made do. And thank God it ended up on the album. Anyways, like I said, this to me is the highlight. I think this is the classic bit of Deep Purple, and yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. And I don't see why Ritchie dislikes it so much, especially considering like around the time of Mark II, like a big part of the reason why Blackmore was not fond of Gillan at the time was oh no, I want to go into a bluesier direction, and that eventually manifests itself in Burn. And then Gillan comes out with this like great bluesy song, and Blackmore's like, I'm not recording that. But that's Ritchie. Yeah, that's what he does, right? It's again part of the reason why these people are such characters. That's why we love them so much, right? But yeah, that's Mitzi Dupree, classic, favorite song on the album. I'll say it right now, hands down, that's my favorite. And that's that. And then the final track on the album, track 10, quite appropriately, again, like the two warring members, the album finishes off with songs that represent each one. So Mitzi Dupree is very much Gillan's baby, Dead or Alive is very much a Ritchie thing. And this is that that kind of new tradition of these really fast-paced, riffy numbers. Again, I mentioned with Gypsy's Kiss, I think there is a lineage of songs that could be traced back to probably Spotlight Kid from Difficult to Cure, the Rainbow album. And I think it's really cool. The intro riff is really good. And then the riff itself, that again, it's a very melodic riff, but it's very fast paced, very frantic. Apparently Gillan really hated this song as well, and I think that speaks volumes. The fact that Blackmore doesn't like Gillan's song, Gillan doesn't like Blackmore's song. You could just tell that that it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't gonna last, right? But I think Dead or Alive is really good. The middle section is one of the highlights of the album. I think that's a classic bit of Purple. Again, we get that sort of classical influenced passage, and we got a great John Lord organ solo, which it's about time. Third one of the album. It is the last song on the album, but of the 3 of the 10 tracks, this is one of the ones where he gets to show off a little bit. Live versions of this are really good. They're much more intense. The live version on Nobody's Perfect starts with like a classic little bit of blues, and then off they go into the races, into this very fast-paced, kind of crazy number. And yeah, that's Dead or Alive, and that wraps up the House of Blue Light. Yeah, a misunderstood album, I think. Maybe it's that's not the right word. I don't think it's misunderstood. I think it's a much maligned album, and I don't necessarily think that's fair. I still think there's a lot of good stuff on here. I find it extremely difficult to compare it to Perfect Strangers, to be honest. The average person would argue that Perfect Strangers would be stronger because it holds up better as a total album. But like I said, the good stuff on this one, I really like. I'd take Mitzi Dupree over anything on Perfect Strangers. So yeah, there's that. So then 1987, they go on another massive tour. Yeah, and this is where things fall apart, quite a bit more. I think the tour actually goes up into 88. But at some point, a few shows in 88, not a lot. But on the tour, this is where I think Blackmore and Gillan start to become more openly antagonistic towards one another. And it really kind of culminates. It's a long story. I mean, Blackmore's got his side of it, Gillan has his side of it, but the crux of the biscuit, if you will, is Gillan felt he had to get revenge on Richie for something. Richie says it had to do with the band not giving his friends food, so we took the band's catering and put it in his dressing room because they always had a separate dressing room. Again, the story is very convoluted. But in any case, there's a show where Blackmore's got spaghetti, and then Ian Gillan puts some ketchup on it. Somebody says, "Oh, Richie, Ian Gillan has put ketchup on your spaghetti," and Blackmore proceeds to splatter the spaghetti all over Ian's face, and that is the famous spaghetti incident. I honestly think that the album that Guns N' Roses did, the Spaghetti Incident, I read somewhere that it was named after this event where Blackmore splatters spaghetti all over Gillan's face, and then they almost come to blows, and it doesn't work out. Well, thankfully, like they don't actually hit each other. I think Gillan in that case was the bigger guy and just kind of walked away. But yeah, their relationship was very poor at this stage of the game. And they take another break through most of '88, and then in 1989, I think they get back together to do some rehearsals, and I think the core disagreement had to do with touring. I think Ian Gillan wanted to do more touring, and then Blackmore didn't, and then it resulted in another big altercation. And finally, Blackmore goes to management and says, "Hey, it's either Ian Gillan or me." And at that point, management decides that no, we should fire Ian Gillan. So Ian Gillan is fired in 1989. In the 70s, Gillan quits. In the 80s, he is actually fired. And then the whole story of this whole period kind of leading right up to the point where Morse gets into the band, it's so interesting to me because you get the classic lineup again. Things don't work out, so it's like, okay, and the two main problems, it's Gillan or it's Blackmore. They're the two that are really causing the issue. So it's like, the first time, Deep Purple says, okay, well let's get rid of Ian Gillan and we'll bring another singer in. And of course, Deep Purple make a Rainbow album. Not really, but sort of, kind of. We'll talk more about that. I've talked too much about that era already in this video. So yeah, they get rid of Gillan, they bring Joel and Turner. That doesn't work out, so let's bring Mark II back together again. And then that also doesn't work out. That, even though I think that era is really good, I think the few live performances that version of Mark II do, I think they are really good performances. But that does not work out. Obviously, Blackmore leaves, and then Joe Satriani fills in famously, and then Steve Morse kind of lines up. But it's funny to me how Purple knows that the two main problems are Gillan and Blackmore, and it's like, okay, let's get rid of Gillan. Oh, that didn't work. Let's get rid of Blackmore, and then it's like, oh, maybe that was the issue all along. But yeah, all stuff that will be talked about in future videos. Thank you so much if you made it this far. I really appreciate it. If you did like it, like, comment, and subscribe, but I didn't say that because I'm not a conformist. And on that note, thanks again, and you'll see me in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.